I wanted to begin with thanks to the people who've helped support the visit of Jane Tompkins and Joe Graff here tonight, which include the Goldtrap Fund, the Department of English, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Miller Lecture Fund, the Lectures Committee funded by GSB, the Graduate English Association, the Department of Architecture, Women's Studies Program, the College of Education, the College of Veterinary Medicine, the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, the College of Agriculture, and the Center for Teaching Excellence. We had a lot of people who were interested in this visit. And then I'd also like to introduce to you Gunnar Benediktsson, who's going to do the formal introduction of our visitors. Gunnar is a graduate student in the English department. He's about to finish his degree. He's to receive an MA in creative writing, and he's working on a collection of prose poetry. Next year, he's going on to study for his PhD at the University of Iowa. He has very broad-based interests. He's not only a creative writer, he's interested in literary studies and has been very active as an editor, as a writer. He's gone to conferences, and the English department has been very happy to have him. He came as a Hogarth Fellow, a Pearl Hogarth Fellow to our department. He also came a long ways to get to Iowa. He's an Icelandic Canadian, so he's come to the balmy South for a little change of pace. So, Gunnar, it's your turn.
Well, since I was told this was a formal introduction, I was planning on having a podium on which to put my papers.
Let's see, we defeated you.
Well, which means I'm going to have to put them on the table. So since these papers say stuff about you guys, I'm going to have to ask you not to look at them. I'm sure I needn't tell you what a pleasure it is to be asked to introduce Jane Tompkins and Gerald Graff. When Susan Carlson asked me to do this, I was thrilled, honored, and also terrified. Because when you're asked to introduce Jane Tompkins and Gerald Graff, what do you say? I mean, it's funny because my peers and I are in a rather unique position in relation to these two critics. We're perhaps members of the first generation of young critics who read Me and My Shadow before reading Foucault's Archaeology of Knowledge, and who read Beyond the Culture Wars before reading Writing Indifference. I suspect I'm not alone in saying that A Pedagogy of Counter-Authority was actually my introduction to the world of pedagogical theory. What I'm saying is that my generation of young scholars is entering the critical conversation at a crucial and exciting moment. It is the moment when Gerald Graff is suggesting that the way we teach literature and the way we practice literary criticism are not so different after all. That the teaching of literature can and should reflect the broad fundamental disagreements that exist in the critical conversation. It is also the moment when Jane Tompkins is suggesting that we re-examine theories and systems on erasing the writing subject in order to preserve the illusion that criticism is based on neutral empirical precepts. Professors Tompkins and Graff are both at the University of Illinois in Chicago right now, where they're redesigning the landscape in other ways. I want to close by saying that here, in this room, we may not be saving Dover Beach, but we are extending the critical conversation beyond its usual boundaries. So maybe here in this room tonight, we can get lost just a little. It gives me great pleasure to present Jane Tompkins and Gerald Graff.
Thank you very much, Gunnar.
Thank you for that very kind introduction and very gratifying. And thank you, Susan, and everyone who made this possible, as they say, and all the work that people put in. We're going to read from a dialogue that we've written. Those of you who came to our event this afternoon were exposed to one of our dialogues called Can We Talk? Excerpts from it, which we use to sort of frame the discussion. And tonight we have a second dialogue that we're still working on, so be careful what you say, because it'll probably get into, in some ways, what it'll probably have some effect on, and this is a document in progress. And although we didn't have the title for it, I think when we wrote this, we decided to give you the title of sage on the stage and guide on the side, which is the point of departure of the discussion, though we move out to various other issues. We're going to do the same, use the same format as we used this afternoon of each reading our own parts, but then when we finish this, we hope to do about 20 minutes or so of this initial reading, and then we have a little exercise cooked up. We needn't go into that right now. We'll go into it after we finish, okay? Then we'll open things up to general discussion.
And it's the kind of exercise that you might use in a class, and we were hoping that the exercise would not only help you to start talking about the issues we're raising, but also perhaps become itself something that you might want to talk about the practice of, or what good does it do to do this kind of exercise with your students. Jerry and I differ over the value of such things. So welcome to the Jane and Jerry show.
Dear Jane, there's an interesting passage in your book, A Life in School. Is the voice level okay back there? There's an interesting passage in your book, A Life in School, that succinctly sums up a dilemma perennially felt by teachers. Do we go at our students and teach them aggressively, or do we back off and give them the room to teach themselves? In the first case, it seems, we risk intimidating and silencing students, but in the second, we risk not teaching them at all. You defend the second option, giving them room to teach themselves, but apparently with mixed feelings. In the passage I have in mind in your book, you imagine what you call, a person you call an internalized critic, who writes to you as follows. Dear Professor Tompkins, I think you're fooling yourself. You're cheating your students under the guise of liberating them. These students need guidance. They need a model. They need to hear books discussed boldly, rigorously, with discipline, and in a spirit of inquiry. They're only 18 or 19. They don't know how to be intellectuals. It's your job to show them, and you're not doing it. You ought to be fired. And here's what you say in reply.
It's signed disgusted.
Signed disgusted.
A class doesn't get to know itself until it has been let go. People's personalities won't be visible. Their feelings and opinions won't surface unless the teacher gets out of the way on a regular basis. You have to be willing to give up your authority and the sense of identity and prestige that come with it for the students to be able to feel their own authority. To get out of the student's way, the teacher has to learn how to get out of her own way, to not let her ego call the shots all the time. This is incredibly difficult, but I think it is a true path for a teacher. I don't remember how I signed it, Jane or something.
Admirably here, you state the objection to your view as forcefully in the internalized critic. You state the objection to your view as forcefully as I can imagine. Still, as you know, I side with your internalized critic, except I don't want to see you fired. Though when I said that to Jane, she said, well, why not? You know, if you follow the logic out of that. If we pick up where your dialogue left off, as we agreed to do in this exchange, then I would retort that getting out of the way on a regular basis doesn't help students' personalities to become visible or their feelings and opinions to surface, at least not in ways that are relevant to most academic courses. The way to help students express their personalities and feelings better is to provide them with some intellectual substance that they can internalize. Having said that, I think I'll get out of the way and see what you're thinking on this issue.
And from now on, we're going to be summarizing the substance of our exchange, so it won't be a word-by-word reading. If only it were true, Jerry, that all we had to do was put intellectual substance before our students. That's what I used to think right after I got out of graduate school. I would come into class, with the latest theory, hot off the grill, full of enthusiasm, and put it before my students, and there they were with their baseball caps on backward and their Diet Coke cans and their school newspaper, and, it didn't fly. you have to do more than simply present intellectual substance, even with passion and intelligibility. You have to open up a space around the subject so that the students can get a handhold on it. You have to leave room for them to make their own connection with the material and structure ways for them to address the material so that it means something to them. So many times in my own schooling, it seemed to me that the professor's ideas about a subject or bias got in the way of my own grappling with it, so I felt somehow squashed or left out. At the same time that you need to find ways to let the students grasp the material on their own, you have to realize that students come into our courses already sort of battered into submission, in a sense. That is, lots of students feel that they don't have anything to say, that nothing that they say is going to be worthwhile because they learned a long time ago that their opinions weren't valuable because they'd been put down or that they'd been in classroom situations where it was too risky to speak. So it's incumbent upon us, I think, to create the kind of atmosphere in class that will allow such students to recover their own voices, to recover some sense of their own worth and of the worth of their own thinking and of their own thoughts. And what this comes down to is essentially creating a feeling of safety in the class, that when a student opens his or her mouth, he or she is not going to be criticized, is not going to be judged, but is going to be honored and listened to. This takes a lot of thought and skill. It's not an abdication of our responsibility as teachers, but it's a way of, what was I say here? It's an assumption of responsibility for areas of student experience that we were never made aware of when we went to graduate school.
Well, I agree with a lot of what you say. I think we agree that teachers have to be concerned not just with the substance of what they're teaching, but with their students' reception of it and how it connects or fails to connect with their lives. But this is what I had in mind when I suggested that the intellectual substance we provide has to be internalized by the students. I think you're right that often teachers are so concerned with the substance that they don't think enough about the problems students have internalizing it. Where I think we differ, though, is that it seems to me that opening up a space for students, enabling them to feel the discussion is meaningful and so forth, doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with whether the teacher talks a lot or gets out of the way. It seems to me we can fail either way. Though it is certainly crucial to establish a classroom climate in which students feel it's safe to speak up. This is just the first step in helping students get what you call their own handholds on intellectual issues and intellectual forms of talk. As for the safety zone that you talk about, a class, it seems to me, can be the safest, most caring environment in the world and still be a lousy class, in which students never do get an adequate handhold on the intellectual culture that the class is presumably supposed to be about. So maybe we need to talk more specifically about these conceptual handholds that might close the gap between student talk and teacher talk, and less about who's going to do most of the talking.
Well, I agree. I mean, it's important to find these, conceptual handholds and so forth, and I don't think anyone would disagree about that, but I don't want so quickly to dismiss the question of safety and the atmosphere that obtains in classroom situations. My own experience as a teacher has made me aware of how difficult it is, really, to have a classroom in which students feel truly safe to say what it is that they think, what it is they do. It takes me quite a while in a class to arrive at the point where students can really speak directly and frankly to one another and speak from a fairly deep level within themselves. And it's something that I've been working on for years, and it usually takes me about 5 or 6 weeks to get to that point. There have been times when I've really never gotten there, or when I've only gotten there right at the end of the course. I think that what I'm talking about could be understood as a matter of trust. That is, you have to be able to trust the other people in the class, not just the professor, but sometimes it's the other students that the students are afraid of, even more than what the professor will say. So it's a question of really educating students in what it means to be a member of a group in which you show the most profound respect for the other members of the group, in which you are non-judgmental, respectful, in which you will not carry away, personal material out of the classroom, and in which you are fully present and participating. And in my own case, okay, there we go. I think it's quite an art. The aim is genuine relationship between and among the members of the class, and a sense of mutual support in reaching a common goal. This atmosphere of trust that I'm talking about doesn't rule out conflict. I mean, this afternoon we sort of went back and forth over the advisability of conflict in academic conversation. In fact, what I would say is that unless and until you have this sense of trust in a group of people, the members will not be able to get down to the bedrock of their differences because they'll be afraid to go there. That it takes safety, it takes trust to be able to make yourself vulnerable enough to expose that point at which you really differ from another person. It's not easy to build among a group of strangers the kind of trust it takes to risk revealing who you really are.
I think where we differ is over the causes of this classroom problem that I think you described very well, and over the best way to go about overcoming it. I see the student fear and distrust that you described very eloquently as rooted in the lack of what you a moment ago called the conceptual handholds that we need in order to enter confidently into academic intellectual discussions. I mean, of course kids are going to be scared to death to speak up and fearful or distrustful, fearful of being embarrassed. Who wouldn't be if you're thrown into an academic discussion without a grasp of the way one plays that kind of game and unsure how you get a grasp? In other words, if you don't know how to use the language of your imagined, your own self-constructed critic, if you don't know how to be an intellectual, if you don't talk the talk, as we say, of the intellectual culture, then of course you're going to exhibit all the symptoms of extreme discomfort and embarrassment and distrust and fear that you describe in the face of intellectual talk. But if my diagnosis is correct, then the remedy should be not to hold a retreat as a kind of safe haven from the curriculum and from the intellectual world. In other words, a kind of stop the world while we learn how to trust each other, if that's what you're sort of getting at. A better approach for me would be to do more than I think we do to help these students become socialized into the academic intellectual game and its intimidating kinds of conversations, which then will build confidence and possibly remove some of this distrust. Okay,
That's the point at which we differ, I think, not just in terms of method, but in terms of what it is we're getting at. You see yourself as socializing students into the rules of an academic game, and I would say that introduction or initiation of the outsider into the conventions of a guild is perhaps something that we would want to do, but that it's not enough. I mean, at the end of A Life in School, I end the book saying something like, what we want to do is to not train people but for careers, but prepare them for life. So I think that as our methods differ, that is Sage on the stage versus Scott on the side, it's because our aims differ. And that's maybe what we ought to be talking about. That is, what is it that you're trying to do as a teacher, and what am I trying to do? Yeah, okay. Here we only have one copy. Okay, so we have to hand it back.
Well, I'm not talking, when I talk about socializing students into the academic game, I'm not talking about careerism necessarily. But I plead guilty to wanting to socialize students into the conventions that govern intellectual exchange within the academy. What else are teachers supposed to do? Withhold those conventions from the students? I think we do enough of that already. I think you may have an overly narrow and pejorative view of academic discourse in this discussion. For me, it's not careerism or some kind of mechanical, meaningless process. To me, you yourself provide a good model of academic discourse at its best in the kind of writing that you do. You've learned to play this game well. I think I want the students to learn to play it equally well. Does this help to bring us closer?
I don't know, Jerry. We've departed from the script here. No, I don't want to withhold that kind of experience from the students. But I think that you and I are not that we don't agree on what the aims of a liberal education are. That we just, I see it as the building of a whole person, and you see it as the initiation of a person into a certain mode of discourse, which I think is valuable, but not enough.
Well, I don't see any incompatibility in what I call socializing students into the academic culture and developing the whole person. I mean, ideally, students would find personal meaning in what our academic culture is about in the various conversations and discussions and studies that we perform. You at times, though, seem to talk as if academic discussion, and this sort of relates back to our discussion this afternoon of the competitiveness of conflict and so forth. At times, you write as if there's kind of incompatibility between getting socialized into the academic culture and finding personal meaning in your life. Is that not the case? Because I tend to see these things as very, very compatible. But
Why don't we break off at this point? Rather than my replying to Jerry, I think what we'll do is have our exercise now. Is that okay? And the exercise goes like this. We're at this point just asking you to step in to this dialogue at whatever point you choose. I didn't bring my timer, did I? Well, this is a 6-minute. This is a 6-minute exercise, and it requires that you pair off. You have to sit next to somebody that you can talk to, and maybe we should just sort of count off from what's your right to left, sort of A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B, and if it comes out uneven, just move or talk to the person behind you. For the first 2 minutes, we're going to ask the A's to simply tell the B's what they think about what's been going on before. You can pick this up at any point that you wish. After 2 minutes, we'll make some sort of noise, or if we can find the lights, flick the lights, and then you'll switch, and the B's will be doing the talking, and the A's will be doing the listening. And for the last 2 minutes, it's whoever, you can just talk back and forth. And at the end of 6 minutes, we'll call time and see what's happened. Okay, so do you want to make sure that you're sitting next to someone that you can talk to? We'd like it if you could pair up, and before we begin, make sure that you have someone. They talk back and forth. Okay, are you ready? Okay, shall we begin? The A's go. That is, the person on your right speaks to the person on the left. Yeah.
yeah, we weren't as How are we going to
We did go on for 20 minutes.
Did we?
It's 25, almost 25 or 9. It is 25 now. I don't know what time we started.
We were late. We started about 10.
10 after. Yeah, I guess we didn't really go for 2 hours.
No, but I think we said what we did.
Yeah, I kind of thought we were running out of steam.
People who were there this afternoon might get more out of what we said.
Right. It's time now.
Call, okay.
It's time. It's time to switch.
The bees have it. Now I think maybe they're mixing it up.
That's right. Yeah, we're supposed to be having fun, right? I think we're
Well, I think we're so established to figure out how to read our text.
Yeah.
We don't have canvas.
Right. Yeah, right. We weren't being very spontaneous.
Take these mics and walk around.
We'll both do that.
Very effective. It's the first time I've ever seen an audience actually do what the speaker asks. How much time?
30 seconds more.
I think really the question we're arguing is what is happening? What is its potential? Is it a deadly? You could argue that agriculture is deadly and deadly and career. I mean, I think that's the
Okay, it's up. It's time now for the change.
okay.
You can just talk back and forth for 2 minutes now, whatever way it goes.
Should we tell them, ask them to pose a question or something? They're doing this. They seem engaged in this. They don't seem bored.
No, that's the reason to do that.
Everybody's.
Usually they do that. That's because we're
Why don't we get up and have
we have another minute for the
Should we hand them our mics?
Yeah, we should. We can both get up and.
We can get them to come up.
No, I think we take these and then go around and give them to them. I think so. I think there's enough time. Okay, we're just going to ask you to arbitrarily bring your conversation to a close. See, what people are talking about among them, and with one another is always more interesting than what the speakers are saying. That's at least my belief, anyway. So, we'd like you to just ask, to ask you just to tell us what you were talking about. There. Give it to it. Give him the mic.
I like this industry, this idea of teachers backing off. All you need to do now is give me a syllabus and send me to the public library.
Somebody else. We'll come back to this, don't worry.
What separates you as a teacher from a group therapist? How is your class different than a group therapist session?
I think you should answer.
All right. First of all, the assumption behind the question is that there's something wrong with group therapy in the classroom. That's an inappropriate thing. And I actually believe that it's not inappropriate. I think that we live in a world where we have divided ourselves up into so many categories. And we have specialists. We have specialists to take care of our spiritual life. We have a specialist to take care of our emotional life. We have a specialist to take care of our intellectual life. We have a personal trainer to take care of our bodies. That is, we live in this specialist culture, and as a result, we have divided ourselves up into all of these categories. And I don't think that that's a realistic way of approaching human beings, and a way of a good basis on which to conduct the education, that is to say, the nurture and growth of human beings. So I think that people who are responsible for the education of young people need to be people who are in touch with all aspects of themselves and are able to take responsibility for more than just one tiny segment of the human, of what it means to be alive. So the answer is there might be times when a class that I conducted did resemble group therapy, in the sense that people would be talking about emotional material in a way that was personal and being responded to on that level by other members of the course. And there would be a kind of an intimacy and an openness that one doesn't normally associate with the college classroom. If that were the case, I would say that was a real step forward, and it was a step toward the integration of the emotional into the intellectual enterprise. So I would say that was not a criticism, which is what it was intended to be, but actually a good thing. That was a long answer. Here. Well, the kind of teaching that I do right now is focused on self-exploration and discovery. It isn't content-oriented. That is, it's not focused on a text or on the coverage of a certain body of material. So the examples that I will give might not be helpful. Okay. In the course that I have been teaching, team teaching for the last 4 years, which is called Writing Spiritual Autobiography, and I teach a version of that now in the College of Education at UIC. It's called Teaching in the Self. I ask the students to do quite a bit of self-exploration. In the case of the undergraduate spiritual autobiography course, the intent was to allow people to take time to get to know themselves in a way and at a level that would enable them to make intelligent vocational choices. This course was taken mainly by seniors and juniors as they stepped out of the university. Because so often people, university students, especially at a school of the kind that I had been teaching at, Duke, where the students are very good at passing exams, at doing their homework, following directions, achieving. They don't really know sort of who they are or what their actual inclinations and desires and talents are, because they've been so busy meeting sets of external requirements, which they're very good at. They haven't really had time to reflect, to get to know themselves. So that was the purpose of this course. In the case of the course I'm teaching at UIC, it has to do with building a sense of confidence and authority in the teacher, not authority qua expert in a given field, which is the way in which we normally understand authority, but a kind of personal authority that stems from self-knowledge, of knowing what kind of person it is, who you really are, and what it is you believe in, and how you have been formed, and what your experience has made you. In both of these courses, the crucial class comes in about the 4th or 5th week of the course. It can't come before that because there isn't enough trust. And I call this class, I taught it first with my colleague Martha Simmons, the turning point. And the assignment is to ask students to write, and the form of the writing assignment is that you sit down and you write 8 pages without a break. You can go to the bathroom and you can get something to drink, but other than that, you're just sitting and you're writing stream of consciousness, that is unedited prose, in answer to the question, when did the world turn upside down for you? What was the day, what was the time at which everything changed? What was the turning point of your life so far? And what happens in math class is pretty extraordinary. It takes usually 2 classes, 2.5 or 3 hour classes for everyone to report out on this. And I allow everyone to tell their own story, everyone to either read or tell what they have written. And in that class, most of the students are able to sort of get to the core of what has made them who they are as them. And they open up to each other in an incredible way, and they listen to each other in an incredible way. The listening is just as important as the speaking. And it's an example of what Parker Palmer calls knowing and being known. That is, it's the opportunity to be known by other people at the deepest level, and also to know other people at that level. And I find that students have a tremendous hunger for this. And it's a hunger that is not satisfied either in their academic courses or, by and large, in their extracurricular or social activities. So that, for me, if you ask me, when did something go well, it's in that class, given the kind of aims I have and the kind of teaching under, that I would say something went really well. After that class, the course changes. It's the turning point of the course, because we relate at a different level from the level at which we've been relating prior to that. That's a long answer.
It seems to me that there's a problem that, on the one hand, in answer to the question about turning education into therapy, you attacked or criticized the sort of specialized notion of these terms, where we have therapy over here and then presumably intellectual life over there. But then when you, in response to the question about your own practice, it did sound to me like a rather specialized. I mean, you used the term of knowing yourself, or finding out who you are or who other people's are, as if this was something set apart from and different from engaging in intellectually challenging, rigorous intellectual kind of discussion. And as in our reading, when you talk about trust, you talk about it as a sort of separate or prior stage that's in a certain sense specialized. Yes, a lot of students are fed up with schooling and fed up with intellectuality. It's easy to be fed up with intellectuality because schools and colleges often make intellectuality look dull and stupid and depersonalizing and so forth. But my argument is that we need stronger models of intellectuality, not moving off into a kind of separate space where we can, as you put it, know ourselves and so forth. Am I making sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want to get the microphone?
As you sort of dialogue this process through, especially in the early stages, you necessarily have sort of the Jane pedagogy and the Jerry pedagogy. too. And what I'm interested in is the sense in which a teacher's knowing herself, let's say, means that you have to have lots of pedagogies because there's lots of selves out there. And how do you? What's the calculus or the ratio that you can work into some of your discussion that allows that adjustment of my Jerryness and my Janeness to sort of wind up being me? Does this make any sense?
Yeah, I would say that I don't. This is how I would respond to what you have just said. I'm not sure if it's an adequate response. My own sense of teaching right now is that it's not a question of method so much as it is a question of being. That is, it's the being of the teacher that teaches primarily. It's sort of who you are as a whole that is the source of what you do in the classroom. And so that of necessity, there would have to be no one method or no, even a dichotomized sense of what was possible, as we have implied here that there is by our very title, but rather that the method of the teaching or the format, the approach to the subject matter, and indeed the subject matter itself in some way, is an outgrowth of who the teacher is, of who the professor is. And now I'm going to revert to our discussion of this afternoon. I think very often that the teacher herself or himself is unaware of the nature of that connection, has not been asked to reflect in this sort of introspective way on who he or she is and what the relationship is between his or her, identity and past and experience and mode of procedure in the classroom. So, in a sense, what I'm asking for is an integration of a certain kind of self-knowledge and personal understanding with pedagogy that wouldn't set up any one method or other method, but would rather let the method flow from the being of the teacher.
Another way of putting that is to say that once you stop to ask the question, it's too late. The opportunities pass by. Your turn.
Oh, well, what we were saying just now was, in fact, you give some of the answers that we were talking about. We were saying that the text is important. What you are teaching might sort of influence how you are going to approach, whether it will be teacher-centered or student-centered. And also, it depends on where you are teaching. You are talking about certain methods in a universal sense, but if you are talking about teaching a class in Asia, it's very different from teaching a class over here. If you go over there, I think you do need to have some kind of safety, make them sort of feel safe to say whatever they want, because people there tend to be rather conservative. They might know something, but they dare not speak out for fear of being ridiculed or something. But my experience in the United States is that a lot of people here, even when they don't know anything, they will say, okay, and so they feel perfectly safe over here, I think. So I think the setting is important. The material, all those things, influence the way you teach it.
I guess I'm one of the old people, because I had Dr. Walker for Shakespeare and I had Will Jumper for creative writing way back when. And Dr. Walker always did something when he gave a test to his students that I really loved and I used with my students. He always said, there's something in this class that you studied for that you know better than I do. Write up your own question and answer it. And it's a very effective way to find out what you know, yourself, your voice, your willingness to throw yourself out there. And you can become chopped liver that way. And as I was telling him, I taught 8th graders for years, and I developed a myth dictionary of about 3,000 entries from Greek and Roman mythology. And after we did mythology for a while, and the kids had a taste, they had the handles of there's something about mythology that you're interested in. Pick a name or concept from Greek mythology or Roman mythology. Go to my dictionary on my computer, type in that, have it find it, and it will sort out every reference to that. Then you cut that out of there and paste it and get a printout, and then you go write me an original Greek myth that nobody's ever written before. Kids love that.
No wonder you got the teaching award.
Does it matter to you folks what kind of language or discourse the students use? I mean, when Jane Tompkins writes about finding herself or the problem of finding herself or students finding themselves in life in school, I don't have a problem with it because it seems to me Jane Tompkins has mastered a certain kind of discourse that it seems to